Let's talk Bengals and Jets. Reed mentioned on off the bench kind of feels like a bit of a trap game for Cincinnati. I totally agree, right? You got the Bears coming up after that. You're coming on the heels of a big win where it feels like your season now all of a sudden it was falling apart at the seams, and now it's sitting right back here in front of you, and it's kind of there for the taking. And if you kind of take care of business, especially in this game, we said going into Pittsburgh, got to be 2-1 going into the bye to have life. Well, you got one down. Now, 3-0 becomes a potential possibility if you're able to take care of the Jets and the Bears there as well. But there's plenty of reason to be optimistic for the Cincinnati Bengals. But would it surprise you in the slightest if they lost this football game? Absolutely not. The Bengals have, had a history of playing down to their level of competition, right? Kind of similar to the Reds this past year, right? Where it's like, you're going out losing games to teams you shouldn't be losing to, but then competing and potentially winning games when you're underdogs. I think that's really something that's been the case over the past few years, really, for the Cincinnati Bengals. So it wouldn't shock me at all if they lost this game, and I'm certainly concerned going into it. The Jets are the worst team in the National Football League. They do not have a win on their schedule. They have, some controversy here at quarterback. I don't think Glenn has committed to a starter yet at this point. I still think he's kind of feeling that out. Do I have a lean as far as who I want it to be? I don't know. There's pros and cons of both. Of course, I'm talking about Tyrod Taylor and Justin Fields. Fields is playing horrendous football. I don't know. It shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody, right? There are some people in Chicago, oh, it's not his fault. He's still okay. Keep him around. It's the coaching. It's the organization. Justin Fields is not an NFL quarterback. That is very, very obvious. Not an NFL starting quarterback, I should say. That is very, very obvious here at this point. But considering the lack of pass rush that Cincinnati generates, Fields is a guy that is very mobile, and he's got great speed. That's one thing he can do really well. I think that gives you some cause for concern, right? The Bengals, of course, in years past have had some issues with running quarterbacks, all right? Most notably Lamar Jackson. If there's a guy that has kind of similar attributes to Lamar Jackson that isn't Jaden Daniels, it would be Justin Fields. Now, he can't win within the pocket. He's not accurate with the football. He can't push the ball down the football field. But from an athleticism standpoint, evading tacklers and just having great speed, he certainly is a threat. So he certainly would present some challenges for Cincinnati if he ultimately is the starter. And then the other option, of course, is Tyrod Taylor. This past week, Justin Fields was benched in the game against Carolina. They had only, they scored 6 points in the game, even throughout the entirety of the game. I think they had like 43 passing yards in the first half, and Aaron Glenn was just kind of caught in a situation like, we got to switch something up here. And sometimes when you go to the backup quarterback, one of two things usually tends to happen. It usually stays just as bad, or the backup provides a spark, and clearly seems like he's going to be the guy going forward. And Tyrod Taylor did not do that. He threw 2 interceptions. They weren't able to generate any offense with him. So, is he going to provide a spark in a game here against Cincinnati? I don't know. He's a wily veteran. Usually he's a little bit more careful with the football. I just saw the 2 interceptions on the stat sheet. I haven't seen him, so maybe, of course, they're not his fault. But I don't really have a massive lean when it comes to, one of these two guys that I would want Cincinnati to have an opportunity to go up against. I think they both present their own challenges, and they both could potentially, be difficult matchups for Cincinnati, considering the state of their defense. And we kind of highlighted it on yesterday's show, right? The eye test, I say it all the time. I'm a big eye test guy. The eye test tells me that they're significantly better on defense than they were last year. But some of the numbers that Paul Dehner Jr. had at The Athletic would suggest otherwise, that this defense, there might even be more of a concern for the defense this year in 2025 here for Cincinnati. And I said it on yesterday's show. We're going to find out a lot about this unit, right? The numbers are bad. They still show up and make some big plays in critical moments. Certainly, I've seen that from DJ Turner over the past 2 weeks. And, we're going to find out here just how bad this defense is. Because if you have Tyrod Taylor or Justin Fields on offense for New York that has been just completely anemic, if they score points against you, you're in a world of trouble here for Cincinnati. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to what the Bengals do, right? The Jets, it's an NFL football team. They're 0-7, all right? They're chomping at the bit for a victory. They're starving for one. Livelihoods are on the line. Jobs are on the line. All those things are true, but this comes down to the Cincinnati Bengals, right? They have more talent on the football field despite the fact that their defense is so bad. And if they go out there and play their game and execute and play how they did in the second half against Green Bay or against Pittsburgh, and probably could get away with playing worse than that, but if they go out there and play above average football, they should be able to take care of business in this football game. I have full faith in Zach Taylor that he's going to have them locked in and understand just how how important this is. They're not in a position where they can just try to moonwalk into this game and get a victory, right? They're not in a position where they can sit here and look ahead to the Chicago Bears, a team that I don't think is very good, but they've won 4 games in a row, right? And they've got a really good head coach in Ben Johnson and a second-year quarterback in Caleb Williams, who checks all the boxes as far as talent. He just hasn't been able to put it together here at this point. Bengals can't afford to look ahead. They got to take this game very seriously. They got to go out, and they got to handle business. And when I look at the matchups across the board, right, I mean, it's not really a spot. Even, Cincinnati, they're not a top roster in this league. We all understand that. But when you look at all the matchups that are going to be out there on display in this game, it's not like, well, that's advantage Jets. The Jets are bad pretty much everywhere. And I know people bang on Zach Taylor all the time, and I understand that. I understand the frustration with Zach Taylor, but this is one of the few games on your schedule where you go into this game and I go, oh, you got the better coaching staff. You can outcoach these guys. I don't often think that way, right? Particularly in the division with Harbaugh and Tomlin and just guys that you have faced even along this, stretch of losing. The Lions, the Packers, those are good staffs. The Minnesota's got a great staff. Sean Payton in Denver has a great staff. You haven't really had a game this year where you go into it, besides maybe the Jacksonville game, and they're better than a lot of people anticipated as well, where you think, okay, the Bengals had the better staff. They're going to be better prepared, and they're going to have, they're going to be the more buttoned-up, better coached football team. I feel that way here in this game against the Jets. So, I think, as a fan base and really just for the confidence of the football team, this should be a game where you go in, you score early, you make some stops on defense, and you should feel comfortable throughout the majority of this game. I have faith in Flacco that if it's a fourth quarter back and forth game that they can win it, right? But that shouldn't happen, right? If you're in the business of hoping Joe Burrow comes back so you can really mess around and win some games and get into the playoffs and maybe even win a playoff game or two, you got to prove that you can handle the New York Jets at home coming off a big win. And we'll see if they have the ability to do that. We'll see. The Jets have some injuries there as well. Garrett Wilson didn't play last week. Don't know his status here at this point, but he's their best player, right? Sauce Gardner, probably their second best player. He got banged up in the game there as well last week. So from an injury perspective, you should be in a good spot. All right, but you need to see more out of a lot of different areas of this team. And I think number one would be pass rush, right? This is an offensive line for the Jets that isn't good, right? They haven't been able to generate any offense. Can somebody get home? Now, it feels like Trey Hendrickson's going to be able to go in this game, so that's going to help you out a little bit. But, you're not going to have Trey Hendrickson next year. I've said it a million times on the show. It just ain't going to happen, right? And that's what you got last week, and it was a disaster class on the defensive line, right? Regardless of the rotations that they put in there, Osai, Miles Murphy, Shamar Stewart. I get he's coming back from injury. It's his third NFL game, but he did absolutely nothing in the game against Pittsburgh. By the way, not world beaters there on the offensive line for the Steelers, right? So there's lots of questions that need to be answered. I don't know. I don't have the solution for the defensive line. Obviously, they brought in a new defensive line coach, Jerry Montgomery from the Packers. He's here. Their former defensive line coach obviously is out. That doesn't appear that that's made any significant improvements there as well. So we'll see. Need to see steps in the right direction defensively. And if you can't look decent on defense against the Jets, that's a massive issue because, that's the worst team in the National Football League. And from an offensive perspective, I think you're just looking to kind of build off what you've been doing, right? As a fan, you want to be optimistic and hope that it's just going to look like this with Joe Flacco the rest of the way until they hopefully turn things over to Joe Burrow again at some point. It doesn't really get much better offensively than what you have had these past 3 halves with Joe Flacco. And you hope you can continue that. I know there's some people out there, Reed Mouse included, where he's just kind of holding on for dear life because he thinks it's only a matter of time before Joe Flacco throws a few interceptions. Maybe he's right, but, there hasn't even been one throw since his time as the starter here in Cincinnati where you're even really holding your breath. He's being really careful with the football, making great decisions, but still, pushing the ball down the field to some extent, getting the ball in his playmakers' hands. And you hope to just see more of that from the offense because I truly do believe, and I know Joe Burrow has had, issues with slow starts throughout his time in the NFL to this point. And there are people that wonder, if he comes back for the last 3 games, is it going to be a slow start and they'll drop the first game that he comes back? I get that's a concern. That's a fair concern to have. But, if Chase and Higgins are in rhythm, and that offensive line is kind of holding up a little bit, which they did a better job these past three halves as well. They deserve some credit there along the offensive line. I think Joe Burrow can step in here and look like Joe Burrow pretty quickly, despite coming back from that injury. So I think there's reason to be optimistic if you can continue, just hanging in there on offense, right? I mean, this is a team that is built around offense. And even with your third quarterback, there's an expectation that you should still be able to produce without your franchise and Joe Burrow. And you've seen that over the course of these past three halves. You have some favorable matchups coming up, and it's up to you to avoid the trap game situation. Set the tone early at home. Get the crowd fired up. Get them behind you. Get a couple of stops on defense. Shoot, if you get a couple of first-half turnovers, you're really going to be in the driver's seat. But it's all about showing up, executing, and being ready to play, right? And we're going to find out a lot about Zach Taylor in this game as well. Because this team needs to show up and they need to be ready to go from the beginning of this football game. You can't moonwalk into this game, or sleepwalk, I should say, into this game at home against the Jets and just expect to win. Candidly, you're not good enough. If you have Joe Burrow and you only have 2 losses on the year, maybe you can. But in this situation, you absolutely can't. And you can't afford to lose this game. There's a part of me that thinks this is more of a must-win game than last week, even after you won. Right, because you had this momentum. You just knocked off Aaron Rodgers, the top team in your division. The offense looked exceptional. You had a big primetime win in front of the whole country at home. I mean, this Jets team's bad, right? And if you follow up and lose to them, it kind of feels like it was all for nothing to some degree. So there's an argument that can be made that this feels like even more of a must-win game than last week. We'll see if Cincinnati can do their job, show up, execute, be ready to go, and ultimately step up and win this football game. We'll have more previews, matchup discussion, keys to victory, all that good stuff as the week progresses. But I did want to kind of bring up that trap game narrative because it's the reality of the situation. And I don't think as a fan you should sit here and just assume that Cincinnati's going to win this football game. It's the Jets. They stink, but it's still an NFL football team that's starving for a victory, that's got jobs and livelihoods on the line there as well.